First of all, people from Somalia are not garbage. That's not a biased statement. That's not partisan. That's not anti-Trump statement. It's not a political statement. It is simple, factual, a human statement.
Moving on to Somalia now, the country has unveiled a new container terminal at the Mogadishu port, and that move marks a major milestone and significantly increases the country's cargo handling capacity.
Imagine this. In the early hours of the morning, U.S. officials in Washington open their secure briefing files, and the headline hits them like a shockwave. Somalia cancels the U.S. port agreement. Phones start ringing. Advisors scramble. The Pentagon demands answers. Because this isn't just a port, this isn't just trade. This is one of the most strategic locations on Earth, the Horn of Africa, the gateway to the Red Sea, the same waters that global superpowers fight to control. And now, Somalia just shut America out. Inside Mogadishu, the mood is the complete opposite. Somali leaders call it a new era of sovereignty. Local fishermen celebrate. Business owners say, we don't want foreign hands controlling our coastline anymore. But in Washington, the panic is real. Officials whisper words they rarely use in public. Strategic setback, loss of influence, unexpected blow. Behind the scenes, analysts warn that this single move could tilt the balance of power in the Indian Ocean, opening the door for new alliances, new players, and new tensions. How did a nation the world underestimated just deliver one of America's most unexpected geopolitical surprises? Why now? And what does this mean for Africa, for the U.S., and for the future of global power? Tonight we break it all down. The world didn't expect it. Even inside Washington's foreign policy circles, the think tanks, the analysts, the military planners, nobody predicted that Somalia, a country long underestimated by global powers, would make the announcement that sent shockwaves across the international stage. The cancellation of the U.S. port agreement wasn't just a policy reversal. It was a declaration, a signal, a line in the sand. It began quietly. A single leaked memo circulating in Mogadishu hinted that the Somali government was preparing a major shift in strategy. Most dismissed it as political noise. But behind closed doors, government ministers, economic advisors, and military officials were meeting repeatedly, weighing a decision that would ultimately redefine Somalia's relationship with the United States. Those meetings stretched late into the night as tension rose. The country had long lived in the shadow of foreign influence, but something was changing. A new confidence was emerging, born from growing economic partnerships, rising national pride, and an increasing understanding of Somalia's strategic value. Somalia's coastline is one of the most important in the world, over 3,000 kilometers of access to the Indian Ocean, a gateway to the Horn of Africa, a straight path to the Gulf of Aden, connecting to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, the very artery of global trade. For decades, the United States saw Somalia's ports not just as economic opportunities but as strategic footholds, a way to secure shipping lanes, monitor global movements, and maintain leverage in a region contested by multiple world powers. From military logistics to maritime security, a U.S. presence in Somalia's ports meant influence. And that's exactly why the cancellation hit Washington so hard. The United States had already invested millions in negotiations, planning, and diplomatic groundwork. The deal wasn't just about building infrastructure. It was about establishing long-term influence in one of the world's most strategically located countries. Washington believed the agreement was secure. They believed Somalia would never walk away. They were wrong. When the Somali government went public, standing before cameras, flags fluttering behind them, the announcement was delivered. With unmistakable clarity, the U.S. port agreement was officially canceled. Somalia would pursue a new direction, a sovereign direction, one not dictated by foreign powers. Government officials explained that the deal no longer aligned with the country's long-term economic vision and that Somalia must control its own maritime destiny. In Washington, disbelief turned into frustration. Senior officials rushed into emergency meetings. Statements were drafted, then rewritten. Press briefings were tense, carefully worded, hinting at pressure beneath the surface. The phrase strategic setback emerged repeatedly. Not just setback, strategic setback. Words that signaled concern. Words that pointed to deeper fears inside the U.S. establishment. The fear that America was losing the Horn of Africa. For years, influence in Africa has been shifting. New players have entered the arena with aggressive investments and diplomatic charm. Nations once reliant on Western powers are diversifying their alliances. Somalia is no different. As Washington scrambled to understand the implications of the cancellation, analysts quickly recognized the bigger picture. Somalia was sending a message to the world: we choose our partners, we choose our future. Inside Somalia, public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Crowds gathered in major cities. Fishermen in coastal towns celebrated the idea of a port managed by their own government, not foreign interests. Business owners expressed hope that local companies would finally have a chance to benefit from port expansion. Young people flooded social media, praising the government's boldness, calling it a turning point in the country's journey towards self-determination. And this wasn't just nationalism for the sake of pride. Somalia had spent years rebuilding, years stabilizing institutions, reforming policies, attracting investment, and modernizing systems. The country was no longer the fragile state the world once remembered. It was transforming slowly but steadily into a nation capable of negotiating on its own terms. A nation confident enough to say no to the United States. Washington's concern wasn't only about losing an agreement. It was about what or who would replace them. Would Somalia turn to China, whose Belt and Road Initiative had already reshaped infrastructure across the continent? Would it deepen ties with Turkey, a country that has long provided development support, military training, and invested heavily in Somali infrastructure? Or would it seek new partnerships with Gulf nations eager to expand their influence along vital shipping routes? The uncertainty made American officials uneasy. Around the world, military strategists and geopolitical commentators rushed to analyze the implications. The Indian Ocean has become one of the most contested regions globally, with multiple superpowers vying for influence. Somalia's cancellation of the agreement meant the United States would have to rethink its approach, its presence, and its assumptions. This wasn't just a port, it was a symbol of shifting power. Meanwhile, in Somalia's corridors of power, the mood was triumphant. Officials spoke confidently about their decision. They emphasized national control, economic independence, and regional influence. They pointed to the potential for new partnerships that better align with Somalia's goals. They highlighted the need for development driven by Somali priorities, not foreign agendas. For decades, Somalia endured conflict, instability, and outside interference. Foreign governments often treated it as a geopolitical chessboard rather than a sovereign nation. The cancellation of the port agreement represented more than a policy decision, it represented a psychological shift. Somalia was redefining itself, reasserting its identity, reclaiming control over its coastline. As the news spread, U.S. allies in the region expressed concern. They understood what was at stake. The Horn of Africa is a strategic crossroads where global powers intersect. Ethiopia, Djibouti, Kenya, and other neighboring nations watched closely. Some feared increased competition. Others saw opportunities. But everyone understood one thing: Somalia was rising, and its decisions would shape the region's future. Inside Washington, policymakers debated their next steps. Should the U.S. attempt to renegotiate the agreement? Should they apply diplomatic pressure? Should they shift their focus to other strategic ports in the region? Or should they accept the loss and reevaluate their entire approach to Africa? For years, American foreign policy toward Africa has been criticized for being reactive, inconsistent, or driven primarily by security concerns. But Africa is changing. Its economies are growing, its governments are becoming more assertive, its youth population is booming, and its leaders are demanding partnerships built on respect and mutual benefit, not outdated power dynamics. Somalia's decision forced Washington to confront that reality. In the days that followed, U.S. analysts delivered long reports highlighting the potential consequences. The loss of a strategic port could affect maritime security cooperation, shipping surveillance, and regional military logistics. It could weaken America's leverage in an area where China already maintains a major military base just across the water. It could strengthen the influence of nations that have spent years investing in African infrastructure while the U.S. focused elsewhere. Yet perhaps the most profound consequence was symbolic. It showed that African nations, even those the world once underestimated, now have the confidence to reject deals that do not align with their vision, and that confidence, once gained, is not easily reversed. Somalia's leaders stood firm. They assured the public that the country was not isolating itself. It was opening the door to better opportunities, more balanced partnerships, fairer agreements. They emphasized that Somalia's future must be built on sovereignty, not dependency, and that message resonated far beyond Somalia's borders. In Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Senegal, and Ghana, political analysts and citizens alike watched the unfolding events. Many saw it as a sign of Africa's growing independence, a region rising from decades of imbalance and redefining its place in the world. Startups, small businesses, and youth movements across the continent pointed to Somalia's decision as proof that African nations can push back against global powers without fear. This cultural shift, this wave of self-assurance, is one of the most powerful forces shaping Africa today. Somalia's announcement tapped into that energy and amplified it. But as Somalia embraced its newfound leverage, Washington's frustration deepened. U.S. diplomats described the cancellation as a blow to regional stability. Congressional committees requested detailed briefings. Journalists pressed the State Department for answers. Even the Pentagon expressed concern, hinting that Somalia's decision could have security implications. Yet Somalia remained firm, calm, unapologetic. Behind the scenes, the country was already exploring alternatives. Foreign delegations arrived quietly in Mogadishu, offering proposals. Trade ministers received phone calls from global investors who suddenly recognized Somalia's strategic importance. Countries that once overlooked Somalia now raced to establish economic ties. Somalia was no longer chasing partnerships, it was choosing them. That, perhaps more than anything else, is what made Washington worry. The cancellation was a reminder that American influence in Africa cannot be taken for granted. It must be earned and maintained. It must evolve with a continent that is rapidly transforming. A continent that is no longer willing to accept deals that offer short-term benefits but long-term disadvantages. A continent that understands its value. Somalia's youth, energetic, ambitious, and globally aware, fueled this transformation. They asked questions, they demanded transparency, they expected government decisions to reflect national interests. And when the cancellation was announced, they celebrated it as a victory for the next generation. The world quickly realized that this wasn't just a local decision. It was part of a global shift, a recalibration of power, a redefinition of partnerships, and whether Washington liked it or not, Somalia had positioned itself at the center of it. In the months to come, experts will continue debating the consequences. Strategists will analyze every angle. Politicians will argue over what the U.S. should do next. But one truth will remain undeniable. Somalia changed the conversation. It challenged assumptions. It reshaped expectations. It demonstrated that even countries once dismissed by global powers can make decisions that reverberate across continents. And it proved that sovereignty is not just a word, it is power. Somalia is cancelled. Port Agreement may be remembered as one of the defining moments in Africa's geopolitical awakening. A moment when a nation stood tall, faced one of the world's most powerful countries, and chose its own path. A moment that forced Washington and the world to see Somalia not as a battleground of influence, but as a strategic actor with agency, ambition, and pride. The story is far from over. The consequences are still unfolding. But one thing is clear: Somalia's decision changed everything. And as we stand at the end of this unfolding story, one truth rises above the noise, above the politics, above the tension that now stretches from Mogadishu to Washington. This is more than a canceled deal. This is a turning point. Because when Somalia stood in front of the world and said, "We choose our own path," something shifted, not just for Somalis, not just for Americans, but for the entire global system that has shaped Africa for generations. For decades, African nations were expected to accept the terms they were given, expected to remain quiet, expected to follow the script, expected to be grateful for every deal, every handshake, every promise. But today, that script is being rewritten. Somalia's decision wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it wasn't reckless, it was deliberate, calm, strategic. And that's exactly why it hit the world so deeply. Because power doesn't always make noise. Sometimes real power is silent, steady, and unstoppable, like a tide rising without warning. Inside Somalia, families gathered around radios and television sets. Young people scrolled through their phones with pride. Elders whispered lessons of the past, remembering the years when foreign hands dictated Somalia's fate. And for the first time in a long time, they felt something different. They felt ownership. They felt control. They felt the weight of a nation taking back its voice. And while Somalia celebrated its sovereignty, Washington was forced to confront a truth it has long avoided. Africa is no longer the continent of silent acceptance. Africa is becoming a continent of decisions. Bold decisions, difficult decisions, sovereign decisions. Somalia reminded the world that even the nations once labeled as unstable, weak, or dependent can rise and shift the global balance with a single move. And that is why this moment matters. Not because the US is angry, not because analysts are worried, not because the Pentagon is frustrated. It matters because a nation that the world once underestimated found the courage to say no, and that no echoed louder than any weapon, louder than any speech, louder than any pressure a superpower could exert. This is more than geopolitics. It is a reminder that sovereignty is earned, but it is also defended. And Somalia defended its future not with military power or economic might, but with the one thing: every nation has the right to use its voice. Tonight, as global powers scramble to understand what Somalia's decision means, as news anchors debate its consequences, as diplomats whisper in private hallways, Somalia stands firm, unshaken, unapologetic, because for the first time in a long time, the story isn't being written about Somalia. It is being written by Somalia. And whether the world agrees with its decision or not, one thing is undeniable. Somalia has become a symbol of a new African reality, a reality where nations negotiate from a place of strength, not fear. Where leaders prioritize their people over foreign approval. Where history is shaped by courage, not compromise. This story is not about America losing. It's not about Washington's frustration. It's about something much bigger, the rise of a continent long underestimated, long overlooked, and now finally rising with clarity and confidence. Somalia lit a torch and other nations are watching that flame, a flame that says we decide our future. We choose our partners, we define our destiny. A flame that says, Africa is no longer the battleground, Africa is the player. And as the world adjusts to this new reality, one thing is certain. Somalia's decision will be studied, debated, criticized, celebrated, but never forgotten. Because in that one bold moment, Somalia didn't just cancel a deal. Somalia changed the conversation. Somalia changed the expectations. Somalia changed the balance. And tonight, as the dust settles, one feeling lingers, powerful, emotional, undeniable. This is only the beginning.